Getting sober at the young age of 21 years old in New York City. Meet my next guest, Amy Colliton. She was a childhood actor who started her own theater company. She had a lifelong lived on the East Coast, and she shares her 42nd year sober anniversary with us today on the Sober Living Stories podcast. So tune in. She has a colorful story that talks about her wild life in New York City, and then she goes into her sobriety and how it had taken hold and changed her life. She also touches on family alcoholism as a generational component. It's going to be a fun conversation filled with insights about long-term sobriety. Welcome to the Sober Living Stories podcast. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of sobriety. We shine a spotlight on individuals who have faced the challenges of alcoholism and addiction and are today living out their best lives sober. Each guest has experienced incredible transformation and are here to share their story with you. I'm Jessica Stepanovic, your host. Join me each week as guests from all walks of life share their stories to inspire and provide hope to those who need it most. Welcome to another episode of the Sober Living Stories podcast. Today, my guest is Amy Colliton. She got sober when she was young with 21 years in New York City. She has a few perspectives on sober life, and she reminds us also about the disease of alcoholism being a family one, and that her sobriety doesn't protect her children or any other family member from this disease. She has insights from her personal story, and we're just going to dive in and let her tell it. And today's actually a special day for you.
Yes, it
Welcome
is.
to the show. Welcome
Thank
to the
you.
show, Amy.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So today is your 42-year anniversary of long-term
42
sobriety.
years. Yes, 42 years sober. It's kind of nuts. It's twice as long as I was alive when I got here, but that's okay. If you don't drink and you stay alive, you end up with 42 years. So.
Wow. So I'm really interested to get into this and to hear your personal story. I know that you were brought up in 12-step meetings and environment, and that was your road to recovery, as was my own. And so just share what happened, what got you to a point that you said, yeah, this is problematic, and then you decided to make a change, and walk us through it.
Sure. Yes, I did grow up around. My father was alcoholic, and he died about 8 years ago with about 43 years of sobriety, I think he was.
Mm.
And so he was 9 years sober when I got sober and had been in and out of AA for longer than that. And I went to Alateen as a teenager, and in Alateen there's like two types of kids. The ones that are in the back getting high, and the ones that are trying to help them.
Wow, really?
I was kind of both.
Yeah.
I was a little of both, and yeah. So I grew up a professional actor kid, so
Oh, wow.
I kind of that was one of those things that I think most people that have this disease have that something that they latch onto that's that terminal uniqueness thing about them, and mine was that I was a professional kid on TV all the time, and I wasn't and I couldn't really trust anybody,
Right.
but it really I I had seen my father. I actually, my father was a periodic, which is an interesting thing. That we don't talk about periodics as much anymore, but he was a guy who could like not drink for many months and then go on a bender, not drink, go on a bender, and then he finally got so. So I didn't see a lot of my father's drinking, but I saw my mother's reaction, which was, my mother was a very. I'm one of six kids from New York in Long Island, Rockville
Mhm.
Center to be specific, and my mother had a lot going on. So, and she was very, what I see today, a very strong Al-Anon disease. Her codependency was really intense. And then by the time I started drinking, I was young. I was only like 11 years old when I started drinking, and I loved it the first time I drank. I was like, oh, this is it. And now I also saw my brothers and sisters. I'm the youngest of those six. I saw them, a lot of them partying, lots of partying. We were, um, I could say, oh, like the fun and dysfunctional. We were a super fun family. We still are. you know,
Right.
Most of us just don't drink anymore, so that's a good thing. And yeah. So by the time I went into Manhattan and went to the High School Performing Arts, and I started a theater company right out of there. And by then, my drinking was totally out of hand. My drinking was out of hand all through high school, and I was the kind of, I knew I probably had alcoholism. I knew I was going to be one of them out of my family, but I thought that meant that if I knew it internally, like secretly, that I could beat it. You know what I mean? That I
Uh-huh.
had one up on all the other idiots who didn't know they had it.
Right,
And
right, right.
and but the first time I came into AA, actually, I was 18, and one of my brothers was sober in AA, and we got into a terrible argument, and he called me an alcoholic, and I said, and all of a sudden I confessed that I was, and I went to a meeting that night, and that's that power of, like, he was trying to help me, even though he was my least favorite sibling,
Hmm.
and he was trying to help me, and I went to a meeting that night, and I didn't like it at all. I was not happy because my brother was in the other room, and so was my father, and I really didn't want any part of that legacy at that point.
Right. Hmm.
And so but I managed to stay sober because for a while, because I think what it was, I didn't know anything really about myself, but that seemed to be interesting to other people, that I was an alcoholic and at such a young, and there was like
Uh-huh.
nobody else in the program, like really back, that was like 1978, and there were not a lot of young people yet. It just
Well,
was like,
yeah, in pre-record, you said that 18 was actually the drinking age in New York City, which is it
right,
21 today?
it's 21 today. Yeah. Mhm.
Presently? Yeah. So you were actually walking in to get sober when people were just starting to go out and drink, which must have been kind of difficult.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. But there wasn't a friend of mine that said, "Oh no."
You shouldn't go.
Oh yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So just to back up a little, because it may be interesting to listeners, because you see a lot in the news right now. You had mentioned you were a childhood actor. What were some of the things that you were on, and also like that? I see a lot of that, and how you talked about the trust and how it's not there, and it seemed to go hand in hand with like addiction sometimes in the news and stuff. Why is that? And could you talk a little to that?
Yeah. So that trusting was just when I figured
Because you were young.
hmm?
Because you were young and in
Yeah,
a
I was young, and
professional
I just didn't
environment.
think that. Yeah, well, actually in the professional environment, I loved the professional environment. I did a lot of TV commercials, and I did soap opera for a while, and I did a lot of print work, and I worked a lot as a kid, and and mostly in commercials, but I worked a lot, and I loved my professional environment. It was other kids and family, like, even actually my family, my older brothers and sisters, were didn't want me to get a big head, and they would like turn off the TV if a commercial came on, or then I'd walk on the school bus, and people would make fun of me, kind of, and
Right.
so that created this sense of like isolation for me and lack of trust,
Right.
or there was the girls that wanted to be my friends so they could come with me on a shoot, or like,
Right. Right.
and because of some of the people I knew, and that kind of thing. So it was yeah, and like I said, I mean, we all have something that makes us feel more unique, but that trust factor, I didn't trust, and my home environment was not really that safe either. I had that same brother that I actually admitted I was alcoholic to, was somebody that was very abusive to me throughout my younger life, and so and the fact that he was getting, and everybody knew he was an alcoholic too. You could really, he was somebody that was obvious as well as it was with me. But I I didn't have very safe places. They weren't like home. Actually, really, the most safe place was on set. When I was at home, wasn't really that safe. But I just didn't trust what people felt about my that big shotism.
Right.
I mean, I didn't have that really. I felt um, I loved what I did, and I didn't care what you really thought. But that everybody was always saying, "Don't be such a big shot," and I'm like, I don't think I am, but okay, you know.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Makes sense. Makes
Yeah,
sense. Yeah. So take us to 18 when you walked in. I mean, did that stick or did you have a little in and out or
I had some in and out. It didn't really. Well, no, it stuck for about maybe a year or so. But also back then in the recovery programs I was doing, you were not allowed to talk about drugs, so I didn't, and I did them. you know so I was a actress. I was an actress, therefore I was a waitress, and so I hung out with all my girls that I worked with, and we would go out partying in Manhattan, and I didn't drink, but I did some other recreational stuff, and so that ended up becoming a bigger problem, of course, and and then finally I drank. I walked into a bar on the Upper East Side, and this is silly, but it's my story. I always had this fascination with the mob, right? So I walk into this restaurant, and there's all these mobsters in the back sitting there, and I'm like, "Oh, honey, I'm home." And like
I can
within
totally relate to that.
within 2 weeks or less, I don't know, I was working there, and
Mhm.
I quit my other job, with that my other really good job, and started working at this place, and it was full of mobsters and sports figures, and I yeah, and then that started a life for a few years with the mob, and within about six, and then I found that's when I drank. I was working there when I picked up my well, actually I went across the street to a guy who had 12 step. I had helped get sober, right? And he
Uh-huh.
was a bartender across the street, and so I liked that. I liked the part of like, oh, you think it's interesting that I'm alcoholic, and I liked helping people. So,
Right.
like I wanted to get people sober. So but I went over, and Tommy was a bartender across the street, and I said, give me a double shot of Jack Daniels. I'm done with this no drinking thing. And we both took a drink, and that was it for me for the next 2.5 years or whatever it would, until I came into the program.
Hmm.
And and then and then I was with that crowd, and that was a whole other like craziness, and I left there, and the owner of that place, that partnership broke up. He opened up another place, and I went with him, and I moved into the apartment upstairs, and that woman had a boyfriend who was in prison, and she had his child, and he was the head of a even kind of worse organization. Not that the mafia is not worse enough, but they
Right.
were these guys called the Westies. They were kind of a scary crew of assassins, basically, on in New York, and Irish crew, and that was crazy. So now I'm involved in all these people, and I'm nothing to do with my family anymore. They're like scared for me. They don't want anything to
Right.
do with me. I would
Mm.
go over. My parents lived on the Upper West Side, and I know I lived on the Upper East Side, and I would barely show up for anything at this point, and when I did, I'd be I'd have all sorts of money. Oh, then I started working after hour clubs, and I had a lot of money, and I was around people with a lot of money, and I'd show up in Rolls Royces and say, throw down Christmas presents and leave, like that kind. And it was just a wild life in those first few years of the '80s in New York City, and so towards the end, I got sick, and I had gallbladder disease, and they had to take it out, and the doctor looked at me afterwards and said, "Hey, listen, I've been in there." Like, he eyeballed me. He's like, "I've been in there, and I'm telling you, you have the insides of like a 45-year-old chronic alcoholic. You have cirrhosis, and you're in trouble." And I was like, "Thanks, doc."
Wow.
I didn't really want to hear it, but of course I never forget it, right? I can see his eyes,
Sure.
and you never forget somebody saying that to you. I didn't get sober right away or get clean. I actually had an 8 ball of cocaine under my pillow when he said that to me.
Mm.
And I was not going to stop using. And my boyfriend, the mafia guy, he hated hospitals. So he would send me food and cocaine in the
Wow.
hospital. And the nurses were like, "My, you're up fast, Okay. Yeah, well, I'm doing pretty good.
Right.
Um, so and then my family showed up, of course, for that. And I actually have a very close family. I was the one that was, pushing them all away. And
Sure. Sure.
and I and they hoped this was the end. And it was close, but a few months later, I finally I well, no, not a few months. It was only a few weeks later. A few weeks later, I took my first drink again. And that, and it was there's this saying of, you have a head full of recovery and a belly full of booze. Doesn't really work, right? So I'm in this restaurant that I just happened to stop by, to say hello to the girls, and they were offering me drink, and I heard myself say, "It's the first drink that gets you drunk." And I was like, "Oh, shut up," like, don't say that, and but I knew it really was. And even though I had been doing some drugs during that period since the surgery, the drink was always the thing that sent me into like chaos. You know what I mean? It was always the thing that sent me over the edge. And so I drank, and I went on like a 2 week bender that I don't really remember much about, except for at the end, I got beat up very badly,
Mm.
and I was coming home in a stolen car with stolen credit cards and all this, coming back from a trip, and with that roommate. And she is the one who had beat me up. But I had also had an altercation a few days before that, and then we had gotten into a terrible altercation. I was driving down the West Side Highway back to Manhattan, and I had this realization that my life was completely unmanageable, and I was never going to find any harmony, and this was going to be like, this was going to be my life. And I drove to my parents' house instead of my house.
Mm.
And I said to my father, "I think this is it." And he was like, "Oh, thank God."
Oh.
and and like, he was sober now consistently 9 years. And I went to a meeting, and I walked into this meeting, and I contacted a woman that I had known. So I also, throughout this, I had this theater company. And so at the theater company, I'd sort of surrounded myself with a lot of actors that were in the program that were sober. So I called this one woman and said, who I used to pretend was my sponsor, although I never actually asked her that. And I went to her, and she met me at this meeting at this place, and she went to hug me, and I flinched, because I was so entrenched in like all this other crazy. I carried a gun, like it was just silly stuff that I was entrenched in. So, but she loved me until I could love myself, and so did a few other people that came to be my angels. And I actually went to a rehab a few months later because I was having a very hard time staying sober and staying away from my life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And and then there I met a real angel who helped me a tremendous amount for many, many years. And and I surrendered, and I knew the jig was up. Like I wasn't going to be able to do this any longer. I could not sustain the type of, by then I was also a full on freebase addict. And there was no way I was not going to sustain this. So I came in and I put everything down and I detoxed at my parents' house. And my mother's a nurse and she was very loving about it. She was, and I detoxed there. It took a while, it took a little while, a couple of weeks. And then, I entrenched myself in recovery and everything I could soak up about it.
Okay. So, and that was at 21.
And that was 21. Mm-hmm.
And that was, and you never drank again or did drugs for 42 years.
Nothing.
Over.
Yeah.
That's
nothing.
Incredible. You talked about a couple things. I just wanted to pause for a second. And you said something really important. You were alcoholic, but you did drugs as well. But alcohol was your true choice. And, I heard somebody say once, well, I do drugs, I don't drink. So why can't I drink? And I remember telling him, I said, because, picture this, you're sitting there, you have a couple of beers, you get a buzz or you start feeling a little different. Maybe not that night, but eventually you're going to go look for your true drug of choice. So it'll just bring you back. See, it's just so complete abstinence always made so much sense to me because of that, because I heard that from somewhere, because we always hear things from somewhere else. And, you walking into the rooms at 18 wasn't for nothing, whether that's where you heard, that, what I mean? It's like whether that's where you heard a belly full of booze and a head full of recovery that stopped you in your tracks one day, or, it's all not for nothing, when you have these, of course, relapse isn't required, and it could be essentially fatal. Right. Yeah. And it could be fatal, but it does happen. And the small snippets and the people that you meet along the way while you're trying are sometimes just as important as the ones that save you once you get in, Uh-huh. So really interesting story and life, that you led up until that point. It's so grateful that today you share your 42nd anniversary here with us. And so what did it look like for you, your sobriety from at 21 on? What do you think made you stay? What was the true thing that made you stay? The work?
The work made me stay. The work was interesting to me. Well, I had always been a seeker. I'd always been a spiritual seeker too, and so the work made me stay. I mean, once I really got through some of the work and got to have a new experience with the divine spirit that lives within me and I'm a part of, and we're all a part of. For me, I began to meditate, and I began to, once I got to that, and then once I began to give it away, really that sort of became my next drug of choice in a way, like to this day, there's nothing better for me than to watch the light come on in somebody's eyes and to help them through this, through recovery. There's nothing more exciting to me. Not just a couple of weeks ago, my best friend and I had this girl who was completely, resistant, doesn't know, and we started two-timing her, and by the end she was crying and like, I'm alcoholic, and we were like, yay, I walked away feeling so great, I still love.
It's interesting when people share their like worst moments. When you're in a good spot and you're listening, that's going to be their real turning point, And so we talk about the work, but you really have to change everything. You change it all. You have an internal reorganization. So what are some of the things that, you let go of, or how did you make some changes early on that helped you stay?
Yeah, early on, I had a hard time letting go of the life I had been in. It was kind of a big life with all those people, but I managed to let that go finally, and that took me kind of about a year and a half to let him go. Really, it's the him of that, but but it was a whole lifestyle. And so it took me a little while to let that go. And
Let's take a moment to hear a recovery story from one of my sponsors. At the age of 25, recently married and a new father, Jack found himself in a Texas rehab facility detoxing. After 10 years of addiction, he was finally able to admit that it was time to get help. Not only did SoberLink allow him to be accountable and track his sobriety, SoberLink allowed Jack to prove to himself and others that he could make the change he had always hoped for. SoberLink is the portable sobriety tracker, taking the recovery world by storm. It has built-in facial recognition, sensors that detect cheating, and instant results sent to contacts. It's the #1 accountability tool for keeping yourself honest and rebuilding trust. Visit www.soberlink.com/sober-living and check out the show notes to click the link and receive $50 off your device today. Now back to our guest.
letting go of everything I thought I know. So first of all, like letting go of thinking I was totally unique, that there was anything unique about my situation. Like when I became a garden variety alcoholic, it would change the whole landscape of recovery for me, because then I was just an average Joe in this deal, and
Yeah.
that makes a big difference. And I think when you, and then I think when I crossed the threshold from being a taker to a giver, that's
Mm.
the other, that's the other major threshold. And until, I mean, I've been around a long time, and I can see people that don't. I mean, I know people that are a long time that never cross that threshold. They might not have drank, but they never cross that threshold, and it's like, they seem sadder than I am. And
Yeah.
I
So
have a right purpose.
you had used the term terminal uniqueness,
Mm.
I think before pre-record. Could you explain that a little bit? Because that is so true what you just said, and it brings a lot of
Yeah,
relief.
yeah. So that terminal uniqueness is going to, like, if I keep thinking I'm unique, it will kill me. I will never be part of the whole. I will never be, even when I think of like the divine spirit for me, like that is so. I'm not unique in that everybody, we're all connected. This is my philosophy. And so when I'm unique, I'm just, then I can't connect with you. And everything about recovery is about connecting, because we're so isolated. I liked to be isolated. I like to not tell you. I was full of secrets. I was full of, I was never going to be an open book. And I'm an open book now, but before that was going to kill me. That would have sent me
Right.
back out there if I had stayed that unique. And,
Right.
I think of this one moment this was in a meeting on the West Side at the YMCA. And I had been saying, I was in my early recovery, and I was saying that I was, used to have to count till you were like 90 days, right? And I would say, I'm, 32 days back, 42 days back. And well, he's deceased now, but this Peter cornered me afterwards and said, I'm a little tired of that little like F you at every morning. You need to let go of that back, like you. And
Don't.
when I let go of the back thing, that was changed some of the trajectory too. That was like the beginning of breaking down that uniqueness, you know what I mean, like all that
Yeah,
unique
that's
stuff,
so
like,
good. Yeah,
you know
absolutely.
because
Yeah,
I even now, like now lately, I'm taking courses to be a practitioner, and I had to go into this, and I've had years of, seeking and years of learning and stuff, and I have to go into it with what we refer to as the set aside prayer. Set aside everything I think I know and help me have a new experience, and when I can do that and set aside everything I think I know and have a new experience here, I'm open to all sorts of possibilities.
I love that. It's great. And thank God for those one-liners that people throw at us, that are very direct, that make you change something. I remember I was talking once, and somebody who had a way, way more time than me. And he was he was real stern, strong man. He pulled me aside and said, you have a really powerful message, but you cursed. So, and every time which people curse and that's fine. But he said, we're not, every time you did that, it took me about 10 minutes to get back. So I missed some of your story. He said, we're not really doing that here. And I was like, wow, okay. And I made the adjustment, and,
Right.
but you couldn't have told me that in the first 5, 7 years. I would have held very tightly to my F's and but they help you become a better person and in the
Right.
world,
Absolutely.
and I'll
Absolutely.
take it.
I'll take
you
it
know,
too. I'll take it,
yes,
and I'm happy to pass it on, and
sure.
do where I can to be of service, and that became the deal for me, and I stayed in New York for the first 7 years, and then my first 7 years I was sober. I did a lot of a lot of service work and a lot of stuff around the young people thing. I got very involved in that, and I got very involved in going to all these um, conferences all around the Northeast and stuff, and it was fun, and I had a lot of fun. And but then also the other thing I was very into was traveling, and so I would come back from traveling to Manhattan, and I'd be like, I don't know if I want to live this life anymore. And then I decided to move out to California, and that was a whole other journey. And then a little while after that, I met my oh no, I got pregnant and met my husband. I didn't do it in the order what people are supposed to. Um, and um, and then I had a couple of children, and but and then here, and I live in Carlsbad, California. I landed in a really nice community of alcohol of recovery, and I'm really happy about that. And even when I had my children, it's harder to get out there. So my husband and I we had this great house that we committed to having the parties for everybody's anniversary.
Oh, that's great.
I would do
Yeah.
that for years.
So you grew up true East Coast New York girl for sure from your story. Yeah. But I'm not surprised that you ended up on the West Coast. I know a couple of people who grew up in New York City, absolutely love New York. And then their other choices, California, from coast to coast. So that's
Yeah,
really interesting. And I'm glad that community is so very important, isn't it? When
community
we
is
talk about
everything.
this.
Yeah, community is everything. Connection and community is everything. If you have to. And of course, when I first got here, I didn't like the way they did anything here. Um, but I was lucky that a guy I knew in New York had moved to this. Well, first I was going to live in LA, and then I had actually some terrible experiences in LA, and I came down here, and and I and because this friend of mine from New York had lived here, and he already kind of had a community, so it was great. Like I just kind of piggybacked into his community, and I'm still friends with most of those people now that still live here,
Mhm.
and and that was great. And then having children in the program is interesting too. So I had my first child when I was 10 years sober. I have two. I have a girl and a boy, and I um and I just lost my train of thought, but I had two children, and and uh and oh, I know what I was going to say. But and like with that, I was 10 years sober, so I didn't want to they did not know I was alcoholic until they were much older, and
Mhm.
and I didn't want to, and I didn't want my 5-year-old raising their hand in kindergarten saying my mom's an alcoholic. They don't know how to differentiate that stuff, right? So and
Sure.
they saw me, and I'm in this unique position where they never saw me I was not
Mhm.
using drinking in their presence. So they never knew that until later when their dad and I divorced and he began to use again, and they were like, what is happening?
Mhm.
And then I had to explain that, okay, I sat them down. They were like 11 and 8 or something like that. And I said, hey, listen, dad's an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic, and it's a disease. Your father is caught up in it right now. He's a good man. This is not it's not a moral issue. It's not like anything, but
So
he,
true. Hmm.
It's, it's, well, those are the exact words my mother told me one time. She said, it's
Hmm.
not a moral issue. It's a disease. And that was pretty progressive for like back in, but
Yeah,
my
but
mother
so
was
very
quite
true.
progressive. Yeah, my mother was
Yeah.
pretty progressive, actually. I mean, mostly when she said that to me, I thought you didn't like Dad. No, but but she was
But
very
it's the
kind.
truth of it. Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
kindness
she was
of it.
super kind about
Yeah.
his disease. She really did get that, and that was a blessing for me because it was always framed as a disease like that for me. That it was so I always feel like I came by my disease honestly. Like
Sure.
it's so hereditary for me, and
Well,
so
yeah, look at that. Your mom gave you those words, and then you were giving those very same words to your children to
very
explain.
same. Yeah,
Yeah, can
very.
you speak a little bit to how alcoholism and addiction's a family disease and how it
Yeah, so
affects?
I really do think it's hereditary, but then also the behaviors around that are
Mm, yeah, true.
codependency and the lies and the secrets and every alcoholic family has those like we looked great on the outside, the eight of us, you know what I mean, the six we looked good on the outside, but what was happening in that household was a whole other story, you know what I mean,
Mm,
and there was all the blaming and shaming and lying and secrets and all that stuff that that whether you turn out like out of the six of us, whether you turn out to be alcoholic or not, you still are damaged from all that stuff, you know what I mean,
mm,
and so as I was duly, when I first went into Al-Anon, I was only like 3 years sober, and I was still very um enmeshed with my parents, and I mean, my mother and I kind of been in business together. She was like kind of my manager. There was just all this stuff, right? And so, but mostly by the secrets of our household. You get very there's this solidarity about those secrets, and you're not going to let anybody know what's really happening in this household. And the biggest one in my family was my father's was homosexual, right? And is a gay guy. And I didn't know that, but once I did know it, I was like, "Oh, that makes so much sense," you know. But he was so they had all these secrets, and I think like alcoholism just breeds all of that. So then the whole family is distorted, and
yes.
nobody really gets to tell the truth to each other, and everybody's siloed off, and you feel isolated and confused, as a child, and then as an adult, even, until you start to get those, straighten out some of that stuff and take a bullseye look at it, and
Hmm.
so
What do you
yeah.
think I know that you had said went into Al-Anon, and sometimes as you progress and in an alcohol-free life, you live your life, you get your health back, you get well, but like you spoke about the behaviors, and so there's always more, whether you're alcoholic or not, to revealing who you are and how you can live better. How do you think Al-Anon and looking at those things has enhanced your life?
Oh, majorly. I think I was in therapy at that point, and I
Like you talk about the secrets and stuff, but how did you break from that? Like what are some of the things that it brought you freedom from? Like how do you live different because of it?
yeah, well, I definitely live different as an open book, like I don't have any secrets. I at the time I realized I had all this enmeshment, like that I was there's so many classic things in alcoholic families, like that triangulation, like I'm going to tell her so she can tell him, and then we'll figure this, instead of this direct communication and the family,
Yes.
and all that. And I was chasing men all the time. Like I had no idea that I had a problem with a daddy issue, for instance, that I was constantly chasing older men, and and once I realized I had some issues with my father, I was lucky that my father by now had also gained some real recovery, and we could sit down and talk about it, but
Sure.
together actually, and but I prior to that, I didn't know any, I just knew that I didn't know how to be direct with in relationships. When you got into a relationship with anybody, whether it be man or woman or whatever, I didn't know what intimacy was. I had never
Yeah.
experienced it. And I
So
also,
looking at that, you go ahead. I'm
Mhm.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
So looking at that, that awareness or that you didn't even realize you had issues with dad, right? So having that awareness and then looking at it squarely changes every relationship you have after that into
Every,
something every single one. So it's life changing. It's life changing.
every
Yeah.
single one. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I often say I was emotionally illiterate, for years, my first several years that I got here. And it took me a long time to get to even be in touch with my feelings. You know what I mean? Like meditation did that for me, because I mean meditation is a big part of the element to the growth in emotional growth, because I had to stop. I remember like the first time I was in a meditation class, and and I said to the teacher, who turned out to be one of my best friends for many, many years, I said to her, "Yeah, I think we're at cross purposes here, because everybody here seems to want some sort of out of body experience, and I need to be in my body. I don't think I've ever been in my body." And she was like, "Oh no, sweetheart, you're in the right place." And I began to meditate and be in my body and have a conscious contact with the power greater than myself,
Mm-hmm.
instead of being unconscious about my whole life and just be reactionary rather than conscious and responsive.
Mm-hmm.
And then I began to have an emotional life that I was aware of, and I could participate in, and I could exchange with other human beings in my life. That was untouchable territory for me, had I been still using, had I been unaware, had I not been working on recovery and trying to move forward.
Sure. Well, what a
But
gift. I mean, how much more meaning you have in your life now because of that. I
yeah,
mean, just putting that down, the coping mechanisms are down. You're just living your life like wide open.
yeah.
And yeah, it's really, really something. So what did the latter part of like the sobriety look like as you evolve into out of early sobriety and into like um, you know, getting back into your life? Like how was that enhanced by your recovery?
Yeah, so
Professionally and
yeah, right. I was going to
otherwise?
say, like, so it seemed like everything I did, I could just do it so much better. I got a regular job, and started working in the, back then it was in like the print industry. One of my sisters got me a great job, and everything I did, I became the manager or the supervisor, or whatever, or the
Okay.
VP, whatever, and so, because actually, when I had that theater company, I realized that I had a head for business. I stopped acting, and I ran that theater company, and I ran it beautifully, and we started making money, and it still exists actually, but so I loved the business side of things, and then I loved bringing the principles I was learning into that, and everything. I still, to this day, everything I do, whatever the profession I've been in, and I've had a few now, but I'm there to be of service,
Mm-hmm.
and when I bring that attitude into whatever I do, whether it's sales, I've done some sales here and there, or I one of the longest careers I've had in my adult life was as a corporate meeting planner and event planner,
Mm-hmm.
and I loved that, and I always bring that sense of service, into whatever I do. So that makes life so much easier. You know what I
What
mean?
is that? Is your theater company still in existence or
Yeah, the Colony Theater Company. I'm actually not sure who runs it now, but it's on. It was out of the American Theater of Actors on 54th West 54th Street.
you talked a lot about altruism and, you're helping others. You just loved it because I think that really, really helps us, to get outside of yourself is such a benefit because you could sit there in your problem or you could turn your attention to someone you could help. And how has that changed your recovery by always being available to people?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're doing it right now with this whole thing. This is a
Oh,
great service, really, and it takes me out of myself. I mean, yesterday I had like something kind of a first time thing ever happened to me yesterday morning, and a relationship to my daughter who is out there, and it was a little traumatic in the morning, but by the afternoon, I called a few people, and I called the girl I sponsor. I just called a few people, and by the time, and then I got to work, and someone was having a hard time with the whole project, and I just dove into it as to be of service. And the next thing but next thing I knew, it was 4 o'clock, and I hadn't thought about what happened in the morning. You know what I mean?
yeah.
And I had processed it, and I hadn't done anything. I wanted to react to some of what had happened, and I didn't react to it. I said, I'm going to set aside my reaction and see how I feel later today. And to have
Yeah.
that kind of be able to do that is so much more, so much healthier for me than,
Sure. For
even in
anyone.
Friday now, because I mean, again, having raised to my kids are 33 and are about to be 33 and 28. Oh no, 32 and 28, 29, whatever. And they still had an alcoholic mother. I'm not perfect. You know what I mean? Just sobriety doesn't mean that I did everything right. You know what I mean? Just because I raised them as a sober person. I still had my family history. I still had my old ideas. Because once you then get into a whole other phase of your life, so here I am as a parent. Oh my gosh, I don't want to do what my parents did. I want to be a different type of parent. And now, for me, I look back and some of it, I went maybe to the other extreme, I had a couple of years where I was like a helicopter mom, or, I trying not to be, what my mother was so aloof, and I didn't want to be aloof, and, trying to teach them emotional, trying to teach them about their emotions, and I mean, actually, some of that worked very well, they tell me, but or we were meditating, I had the meditating as young kids, and stuff like that, um, you know, but you never know. Like, out of my two children, one is definitely right now a current full on alcoholic drug addict with also some mental health issues, and she's out there, and what my recovery has given me is that I get that I'm not responsible for that, and no matter how much she wants to tell me I am. Just like I want to tell my parents they were too when I first got here. I was a victim too when I first got sober, and
Right.
but I get that it's not my responsibility, and I also get that God doesn't have grandchildren. She's got her own higher power. She's got her own, she came into this world for her own reasons, and via me, yes, but doesn't make me responsible, right? So
Mhm.
I mean, now, of course, when you're a parent, you're responsible when they're little, but um you know
Yeah.
i I didn't create her disease. I can't cure it, and I can't control it, and
Mhm.
just like nobody could with me. And so until she has her moment, and I don't know when that moment's going to be, but
Yeah.
I can't pass on my recovery. It
Right.
doesn't, you don't get it by osmosis, it's just the way it is,
Mhm.
so
The pre-recording we were talking about, my sobriety doesn't protect my children from this disease.
yeah. And she
Right.
actually
Just
had
as an
4 years of
example.
recovery at one time, and it was lovely. It
Mhm.
was lovely to watch and lovely to be a part of, and you know,
Yeah.
but yeah, and we will someday. I mean, I always have hope. I always have hope for her.
Always.
You know, um, and uh, and my son on the other, doesn't seem to have this. My son has a strong Al-Anon program. It's so hysterical. It cracks me up.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't even know it, but he just speaks like it. Like, he'd be
Yeah.
like, "That's not my problem, Mom." You're right. It's not. Good for you. You're right. It's not.
So if there's one thing you could tell people, listeners who are struggling, who want to get here and stay as long as you've stayed, what would it be?
connect with somebody. Just connect with somebody who's been, I don't care if they have a day longer than you. I don't care what, but like connect with somebody that you can do this with, and hopefully you also connect with some sort of power greater than yourself that can help you too, but connection is the key. Isolation will kill you. I was the kind that could isolate in a room full of 100 people,
Sure. And you don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to do that.
You have to do that.
The delay of asking for help can be years. So just do it. You just do it. Open your mouth.
Do it. Because there's so much out there that can help you. There's so many people.
So where can listeners find you as we wrap up? If they want to connect with you during the week.
Best place is Instagram, I think. I'm on there the most, where I can talk to people or whatever.
What is your Instagram account name?
AmyC.113.
Okay. AmyC.113 on Instagram is the best way to follow and connect with Amy. I'm also going to put all that in the show notes, so you can just go down there and click on her Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And just thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your story, and for celebrating your 42nd year anniversary here on the Sober Living Stories podcast. I really appreciate it, and I enjoyed having you as a guest on the show.
Thank you. I enjoyed being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning into the Sober Living Stories podcast. If you have been inspired, consider subscribing and sharing with anyone who could use hope in their lives. Remember to stay tuned for more inspiring stories in the episodes to come. To view our featured author of the month or to become a guest yourself, visit www.jessicastepanovic.com.